Hey, welcome back to Headhunters of the Amazon. Storytime with me. Chapter 8 of Phantom People, not quite in that order, or something. So I went to bed last night because it was a bit hard to sort my phone out. I ended up getting up this morning and deleting half of my shit that wasn't fucking backed up. Well, I actually deleted my shit and my backed up shit at the same time, not even to a recycle bin, because I'm just so fucking smart, guys. This was my sober effort. This was actually my sober effort in the morning. Yeah, I rewatched the video and I laughed at myself. I thought it was funny. So we'll post that one up. But it does mean it's a split version again. So, yeah. The last bit I found a bit hard to follow. You could tell I wasn't with it. We got all these new words like caoutchouc, which is Spanish, but not a pure Spanish word. It's been adopted from the French, and the seringal and the seringa. And I don't know about you, but I was struggling to follow that shit. So I'm going to try to reread that bit again with a bit more something coherent. I don't know, maybe not. So let's just get into it. Right. So, as if to give us an idea of what the country held in store for us, nature had planted the largest rubber tree I have ever seen on the very edge of the clearing where we lived. Now, the rubber trees in that part of the world, the product of which is known as caoutchouc, which is that Spanish-French word we mentioned, grows on the non-inundated lands, unlike the seringa, which grows on the lowlands of the lower Amazon. So the former grows singly, scattered through the forest, while the latter is found in groves of hundreds of trees to the acre. The caoutchouc trees are not worked by tapping, owing very largely to the great distance which would have to be covered to collect the same amount of milk, which can be drawn from a single seringal, as the groves are known locally. When a man would only have to walk, say, a couple of miles to tap 100 seringas, he'd probably have to cover a mile for every caoutchouc tree he found. So it follows from this that it is not worthwhile working on the smaller trees, which give a small yield compared with the amount of time spent on collecting. Again, the trees, instead of being tapped, are just cut down and destroyed at once, the whole of the trunk and limbs being wringed at short intervals and bled of the last drop of sap. Although this is the only method which gives any practical result in the wilds, it is the same tree which is sometimes, although not universally, planted and cultivated in Central America and Mexico, where, of course, the trees are regularly spaced for tapping and become a sure source of revenue to their owners within 10 years of being set out. We never thought it worthwhile working on any caoutchouc tree of under 12 to 15 feet in diameter at the base, representing as many years of life, unless it happened to be near any larger trees which we'd selected. The average good-sized paying tree has a diameter of 2 to 3 feet, just above the splaying point of the roots, and a height of 20 to 50 feet of clear trunk before the first limbs branch. The bark on a tree of this size is from 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches in thickness, smooth, spongy, and of a yellowish grey colour. The rubber milk is contained in the bark itself. The great tree which stood at the corner of our clearing alone produced 150 pounds of rubber and is worth a word or two. It stood a good 120 feet high. The height from the ground to the top of the flat, sloping roots which supported the giant was 10 feet. The roots of the caoutchouc do not go deep into the earth, but spread along its surface in all directions, covering a large area. In the case of this particular tree, a circle whose radius was twice the height of the tree itself. The trees are spotted amongst the dense growth of the forest by searching the ground for these bright yellow roots and following them up. The size of the roots and the impracticality of cutting below their splaying point made it necessary for us to rig up a chopping board. This we placed immediately above them. A split sapling, 6 feet long, was inserted in a slot cut in the trunk, and we chopped while standing on its flat side. It was a whole day's work for the two of us to rig up the board and fell the tree, a bite 3 feet high, having to be made before it fell. When it began to crack, we had to run hard to get clear of the danger zone, for it brought down with it a number of smaller trees, whose branches were lashed to its own by a network of vines and made for itself a small clearing. For 24 hours, no further work could be done on account of the myriads of disturbed insects which swarmed everywhere. Returning the next day, we started to swamp out the trunk of our caoutchouc. It was scarcely visible among the tangle of vegetation, great and small, which had been pulled down on top of it. To cut an open space around the trunk and stump, a task that was necessary in order that we might have enough room to tap for the precious milk, was the work of 2 more days. Then, at last, we commenced the real process of collecting the rubber. After clearing away the vegetation from under the trunk, we stamped a series of depressions in the clean earth, and over each of these receptacles, a broad V-shaped ring was cut through the bark, out of which streamed down the snow-white creamy liquid in a steady flow. Everywhere we made these incisions, in trunk, roots, stump and limbs. At the end of a week, we returned to collect the now hardened rubber. From each well, we dragged a great pancake some 2 inches thick and 2.5 feet across, while from the ropes themselves, we tore the long triangular ropes which had formed as the flow came to an end. Finally, we cleaned the surface of the rubber and made it into small balls by wrapping the ropes around the pancakes. I've given this description of the way in which we tackled that great tree as being typical of the many months of work we put in up the Yasuni. In doing so, I have, of course, forestalled certain events which took place shortly after the point at which I had arrived in my tale. We were not in any possession of any tools or implements except our 2 machetes at that time, but of how we made good our deficiency I shall shortly speak. The investigation we made immediately after our recovery gave such good results that we decided to stay in the locality long enough to mark a good number of trees and then go downriver to re-equip ourselves. On this work we spent 3 or 4 months, moving from one chakra to another, sleeping in the savages' shacks, which they always deserted on our arrival, a most convenient arrangement, living on the vegetables and fruits which they had planted. Finally, having discovered a good trail leading from the bank of the Yasuni to the first chakra, it seemed to us that the best thing we could do would be to build a permanent base for our future operations. And this we did. It was from this house we built there that the savages took their dead comrade's head. The time we spent up there, returning to Andrade's post, was roughly from June to October inclusive, 1897, according to my subsequent calculations. While we were buried alive in that wilderness, however, we kept no record how the days, weeks and months went by. It was a curious experience, that breaking of the last tie with the outer world. Time is the one common interest which those who are cut off from civilization have with those they have left behind. The ruling power which presides over the lives of all men, in whatever dark corner of the earth they may hide themselves, an irresistible force that all must obey. But we two, lost to the world up in that unfathomable backwater, refused, as it were, to face the inevitable. Perhaps at times we even forgot that time was marching on. At any rate, it was a matter of complete indifference to us. Our permanent base was a great improvement on the savages' houses. We made a small clearing, put up a raised platform with a bamboo floor, and covered the whole with a thatched roof. We built bunks of the same wood. On a temporary raft of balsa logs, we went downstream to look for the canoe which we'd cached before starting out into the woods on foot. It was then that we found out that the distance from the spot where we lost our stores to the chakra, which saved our lives, was something like a half a day's march given a good trail. For fire, we had the savages' apparatus, which we seldom needed, however, for we kept a fire of green logs going continuously in the cookhouse. We were living comfortably enough, but the unvarying menu became monotonous to a degree. Conversation generally drifted around to something like the following. Well now, if you went into a restaurant in New York tonight, what would you order? I guess I'd have a dish of hot biscuits and butter and half a dozen mince pies, etc., etc., etc. Well, supposing you're out in a cow town and drifted into a Chinese flapjack foundry, what would you call for? Ham and eggs, by George, and coffee with cream in it. Then gradually we drifted down the culinary scale till we were discussing what each of us had seen in the dustbins at home. Those bits of bread and pie crust, those bones with still a bit of meat clinging to them. How we should have welcomed them then. We even carried a resolution to the effect that we should have chased them down the sewer if we had had a chance of catching them. Only once did we find relief from the vegetable diet that was becoming so irksome. I caught a large land tortoise in the woods, of which we had as fine a supper as any I ever remember enjoying. I narrowly escaped one of the greatest disappointments of my life when it slipped into the river as I was preparing to cut the meat out of the shell. The reptile did not appear to like the water, however, and promptly crawled up the bank again. In any country, a land tortoise is a delicacy. Up the Yasuni, it was a Thanksgiving feast. In our efforts to provide ourselves with a variation from the eternal diet of plantains, bananas, yams, and yucca, we went off after some of the milk which Santiago had shown us how to find. After finding a tree which spouted the rich white sap, we lost no time in taking a good draught. Somehow, it didn't taste quite so good as that we had had before, and it left a slightly bitter savour in the mouth. Within a few minutes, we were writhing on the ground, doubled up with pain and nausea. Jack, between groans, declared that he felt like vomiting, and that if he'd got to that stage, he must be sure bad, for he'd never done it but once in his life. After some minutes of contortions and spasmodic retching, he brought up a pair of pretty little rubber balls, which bounced as well as the real caoutchouc. I too contributed my share. When it was all over, Jack turned to me solemnly. "To think that that is only worth $1 a pound," he said, fingering one of the balls. "If I had to make it like that," he added thoughtfully, "I'd want $1 million an ounce, and I'd only guarantee to find 1 ounce more, by way of speculation." After that, we left wild milk alone. There are a dozen or more trees of which the sap is white and creamy. What we swallowed is called by the Indians caoutchouc machan, the brother of rubber. And so we existed from week to week, living in our new camp and making a trip every day to the nearest chakra for a supply of vegetables. We covered a large area in our prospecting operations, coming across the trails and plantations of the savages wherever we went, but never getting more than a glimpse of their fleeing bodies through the trees. The hope of making friends with that phantom people was gradually dying within us. All the rubber we should ever get, we should have to get unaided, and as for those gold slop buckets... So we worked on and on through a series of uneventful days, marking about 100 good trees in all. Occasionally, the tedium was broken by some unusual incident, of which several stand out in my memory. Once, we were digging yucca in a chakra, when we came across a fine specimen of the mygale, which is indigenous to all the Amazon woods, but is rarely met with. This spider has a purple and black body 2 inches long and black legs. Both body and legs are heavily built and covered with thick hair. It's known to kill chickens and other birds. The Indians think that it lives on such prey entirely. That its bite is deadly poisonous, I know, for I was once present when a cochero died from it. In appearance, it is at the same time beautiful and repulsive. The one we found was large enough to cover a breakfast plate, having a span of about 8 inches, but did not display the lightning rapidity of movement which characterises so many of the larger spiders, especially the tarantula, which is barely half its size. It's twice as big as a tarantula, lads. Calming. Calm. I speared it with a sharp stick and attempted to preserve it, but the ants marched off with every scrap of its body. Shortly before the end of that period of prospecting, Jack, who'd been out alone, walked into camp looking rather pale and excited, sat down, and made one of those brief utterances for which he was so noted. "I guess it's all up with me. I'm going to cash in." This was not the kind of thing one expected from Jack, so I was greatly concerned as to what the trouble might be. He told me he'd been bitten by a bad snake and already felt queer. The snake, he said, lay on the main trail half a mile away, where he'd killed it with his machete. So I ran to the spot indicated and hurried back with the medicine, determined to try the drastic remedy which is supposed to effect so many cures on the Pacific slopes of the Andes. One makes the patient swallow the gallbladder of the snake by which he has been bitten, and applies a ligature to the affected womb above the bite, and a hot coal to the bite itself, until it's thoroughly cauterized. To our great relief, he was all right in 48 hours, having suffered nothing worse than giddiness and bleeding at the nose and mouth. This was one of the 3 poisonous snakes we found during our whole time on the Isuni. It was not over 2 feet in length, mottled brown, green and yellow. At last, we made up our minds to leave. Sometime in October it must have been. We were satisfied that we'd marked enough trees to chop out a passage to New York. So we loaded the canoe with 15 days' supply of foodstuffs and built a stone fireplace in the bow. One morning, having lighted an ant's nest and put it on board, we stood ready to start. As a final attempt to establish friendly relations with the savages, we left one of the machetes stuck in a tree near camp, hoping they would take it as a peace offering, and, having discovered its value to them, come back for more when we returned. Then we stepped off board and pushed off. So that's the end of the Phantom People chapter. Next will be chapter 9, the giant anaconda, but just for discussion's sake, lads, feel free to get into the comments and shit, but how much fucked up shit happened in that chapter, I don't know, the repeated use of the word savages, I could just about get used to that or whatever, put it in the context, but the everything he said about the bit where he fucking took the head back, and I struggled with that. Now, they left a fucking machete, they left a weapon in the fucking tree as a peace offering. That's a clear statement of war. They've just spent the last 3 months eating all the food these guys have been cultivating for themselves. I'm sure they weren't cultivating it for the crack. They probably wanted to eat that food. Yeah. The snake story is pretty cool. I thought the snake story was pretty cool, but that chapter is just so many levels of fucked up. And the tree, the clearing of the fucking natives fucking area, they had their little they cleared some bits and just at the edge of the clearing, so they very specifically didn't clear the giant fucking rubber tree. I wonder what that meant to them, took half the fucking forest down with it, are you mad? I struggled with that. That was a fucked up chapter. That was just a really fucked up chapter. I'd love it. I'd love that it exists just as a... I couldn't have thought of that shit by myself. Someone has this... Yeah. Books, man. Worldviews to other places. So yeah, with that, I guess I will love yous and leave yous and wish me luck with social welfare. I miss wins. That's the situation, guys. I actually miss wins.